so that we have access.
Oh,
There we go.
sorry about
Okay.
that.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Michael Rossi, Chairman of the Clinton Planning and Zoning Commission. I would like to call this regular monthly meeting to order. It is 7 o'clock. Can we have the clerk call the roll?
Michael Rossi,
Present?
Mike Knudsen,
Present.
Ellen Dahlgren,
Present.
Eddie Alberino,
Present.
Will Benoit, Mike Florio,
Here.
Martin Jaffe,
Present.
Alan Kravitz,
Present.
Adam Moore,
Present.
Jay Mandel, and Brendan Saunders.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. So we don't have any alternates to seat tonight, but we do have a quorum, so we're in good shape. Let's go to the minutes, review and approval of the January 9th minutes. Were there any questions, comments, corrections on the minutes? I didn't see anything.
I'll move to approve as circulated.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Mike? Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, for the minutes, we can just do a voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstaining? Motion carries. Thank you.
Hey, Mike,
Yes,
can I ask you a question? This is the Bob Graberick regarding the Bauer subdivision.
okay,
I talked to Abby Pearsall. We determined that it did not need a wetlands permit. And I see on the agenda that it was continued to the March meeting instead of this meeting. Was there a reason for it, or could we hear it tonight's meeting?
No, it's not on the agenda.
it's not on the
It's a-
agenda, so we can't do it tonight.
At the last meeting, that Bob, the commission had some conversation about if there was a requirement, if the Inland Wetlands Commission wanted to see any more information on it. And then to give you time to be able to get the wetlands flagged and get the resources back onto the survey. I think there was the discussion at that meeting that that was the reason behind continuing to the March 13th. And I believe the commission did that at that meeting with your consent, but the advertising and the continuous for the public hearing, since the public hearing is open, was for March 13th. Yeah.
All right, so the advertising would be the issue for not doing it on tonight's meeting then?
Right. you
Correct.
can't-
It's got to be
Okay.
posted for the public to be, aware if there's anyone who's interested.
Okay, yep, I don't see any way around that, so I will see you in March.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, chair comments. I really don't have any tonight, so we'll move on to receipt of applications. And I don't see any.
We have none.
We have none. Boy, we're gonna have we can zip through things to get to some topics we don't get to talk about much. Okay, administrative reviews, staff reports, town planner.
Yep, so just real briefly, I wanted to give you a quick update on some of the things that are going on in terms of the budget hearings that are coming up at the town council on February 23rd. That's a Thursday. The various department and commission budgets will be up for consideration. So that's where the general operating budget for our department for the planning and zoning functions happens. On February 28th, which I believe is a Tuesday, the capital budget is up for review, and that's where the commission has requested the funding in a 2-year block for the plan of conservation and development. So if anybody is interested in attending as a representative of the Planning and Zoning Commission, that's always great in case there's questions. I know Carl does a great job of presenting, and I'll be there to answer questions as well. But just wanted to give you those dates, and I believe March 8th is the final budget vote that night. So that's coming up on the horizon. Other efforts that are going on around town, the Harbor Management Commission is about to engage in sort of a public conversation about the future of harbor resources and use of marinas and interaction with our coastline and our marine resources. They are working on a survey right now that is likely to come out for public review. So when you see, whether it's on our website, through social media, we'll be emailing boards and commissions and letting people know about it. But when it's ready, it would be great for this group and for others to pass it on. We really want to get sort of a wide circulation on that. So I'm trying to help with their consultant to get that ready to go. And then they'll also be announcing and finalizing a date for a public meeting with stakeholder groups relative to planning for the update of the harbor management plan, and just hearing from folks about what their primary concerns, considerations, priority topics are for inclusion in the plan. So that's something that's ongoing through the Harbor Management Commission. And then real briefly, some legislation that is working its way through various up in Hartford. There's a few pieces that you just might want to be aware of and sort of generally pay attention to, and we'll keep you updated if anything is actually adopted. Some seem farther along than others. But there's a couple of significant ones that it does, make, I think, sense for folks to be aware of. One of which is there is House Bill 5796 is an effort to introduce public comment at any meeting that we may have that includes land use boards and commissions as a mandatory element in any agenda, so that you would have to have public comment anywhere that there is this sort of public meeting environment. There's been mixed reviews on that, especially for folks who are acting in more of a legislative role versus an judicial role. So things like ZBAs, if things are pending or have sort of slots on the agenda, folks want to make sure that they can focus things where they belong. But there is a push to sort of make available public comment for folks so they feel like they can come to various boards and commissions and be heard. So that's one that's going through. Another one is I believe is Senate Bill, I believe, 918, which has to do with consolidating coastal area management reviews under the Coastal Management Act. And that is intended to avoid duplication in coastal reviews, where folks may have to go before more than one board or commission now for a coastal site plan if they have multiple kinds of applications that they have to apply for, and a coastal site plan is required. Right now they're having to do it more than once, and so we are trying, the legislature is trying to consolidate that and say only one coastal review is required per project, so that the folks aren't doing things multiple times. The last one is fairly significant, Senate Bill 915, and that has to do with the subject of variances and how the Zoning Board of Appeals hears variances and sort of who and how that affects. And so, so there's language in there on two types of variances, use and then the dimensional variances, and what the test is in order to grant those. And the sort of summary of it is that use variances may still have a strict hardship test if this legislation were to pass, but dimensional variances would be sort of a series of factors that a ZBA would consider and weigh all against each other, and essentially have to come up at the end with a vote that says the potential impact of the variance that's being requested will not cause undue harm, and the need for that variance outweighs the impact that it may have on anybody else in the district, surrounding neighbors, any of that kind of stuff. So it's more of a consideration of factors to award a variance, and not the sort of strict hardship test that has been on the plate for many years. There's a lot of opinion about that, for and against, and that can certainly be up for discussion if folks have anything they want to add in terms of opinion on that tonight. But I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware that these issues are moving through, and there's a lot of conversation in the planning community surrounding them. And what I can do is, if anybody doesn't have links to those or doesn't have isn't spending time like some of us in the legislative agendas, I'm happy to set out some links for folks to take a look in more detail.
I think it would be nice if you gave us those links. That would be something that we may want to follow up on.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess I'm up. Just to piggyback on what Abby was saying with the coastal site plan reviews, the CAMs, that's something we run into a lot because a lot of people need one for ZBA. And the thought was always that ZBA would look at that portion of the application that was going before Zoning Board of Appeals, and the rest of it would be looked at through planning and zoning. So we have had people have to do a CAM for both. So I think that one might be really helpful for people. The other one, I agree with Abby, very controversial on the ZBA piece. I've been spending a lot of time working with Abby, kind of talking about historically some of the things, the policies and procedures we've had in the office, histories of some of the properties. And so we've been working together to, I think, make the office run more efficiently. Abby has some terrific ideas for ways to streamline our software, our permitting system, our GIS system. So I think we're making a lot of terrific changes. And I know those will be discussed later as well with the zoning regs, because we've had a lot of conversations about that too, and sort of where did this come from and why do we have this regulation? Those are definitely some things I think it'll be great to work on. So for wetlands, we just have a couple of issues in front of us right now, just to kind of bring you up to other departments, stuff I'm doing. We had the bridge is all set at Carter Hill. The issue with a longstanding violation that I'm working on for wetlands is hopefully coming to a close. I have a couple of planning and zoning violations that I've been working on zoning that are hopefully coming to a close as well. Still dealing with a lot of blight, more chicken complaints. I think partly because of the price of eggs, more people are getting chickens. Those seem to be a real problem between neighbors. Other than that, I think things are pretty much running the course. ZBA hasn't been extremely busy, but a lot of the issues we're talking about, which Abby discussed already, are things to do with properties in flood zones on small properties where people want to build a large structure. And I know that's going to be handled partly through the Coastal Resiliency Task Force, is about discussing some of that. And I'm super excited for that, because that's something I struggle with when I see all these applications going to ZBA, and we often get contradictory comments where an engineer for an applicant might have one opinion and the senior coastal planner at DEEP has another. So I'm hoping that in time, this will help to resolve some of those issues. And I guess that's about it. Unless
Okay,
anybody has any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Kathy? No?
Abby, should we put on the next month's agenda executive session for litigation?
We'll talk about that offline, and yes, yeah, we can do that. Yep.
Just some updates.
Okay. The next item is the Coastal Resiliency Task Force. See if I can talk tonight. And we were given the memo about this, also the document giving the purpose and charges and responsibilities. The important thing for me on this is that they need somebody from, or would like somebody from our commission to be part of this task force. And so I'm hoping that we'll have somebody here tonight who's willing to participate on the task force. Is there anybody who is interested in doing this at this time? Otherwise, I'll have to talk to people individually. Yeah. Eddie,
I would like to do that.
you would like to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anybody else? If not, I will gladly give this to Eddie as our representative on the task force, but okay. Eddie, congratulations. You've taken on more responsibility.
Okay.
I'll be bothering Abby.
That's what I'm here for.
Okay, Abby, did you want to say anything more about the task force?
Sure. Just the purpose of the task force is really to create a multi faceted group that can, is comprised of folks who across the board in town who touch resiliency issues, to make sure that when we're looking at coastal resiliency, we're looking at it in a holistic manner. The primary and early goal of this group is going to be supporting the work to create the planning effort that has been funded through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. The towns of Saybrook, Westbrook, and the borough of Fenwick, as well as Clinton, have about $150,000 to craft a plan that looks at regional coastal resiliency and leaves each town with a series of recommendations and at least a couple projects each that have been advanced a little bit more to start to have estimated costs of completion. What we're trying to do is advance projects that we can then have ready for the next rounds of funding that are likely to come out from the federal government and from various organizations and also through the state, to try to make sure we have what, there's sort of everybody is funding shovel-ready projects. And in order to get there, you've got to have a plan in place and you've got to have some preliminary engineering done. And so that's really what that first effort is to sort of prioritize and make sure that the plan reflects Clinton's needs in context of the broader region. So those are all important things. The other piece of the group will be doing is helping to set implementation goals and strategies for how to promote resiliency relative to the impacts of sea level rise, climate change, all of those topics. And some of that, as Kathy was saying in her report, there may be recommendations that come out of that relative to zoning regulations and coastal pieces. There may be specific, facility management pieces. There may be things for DPW in there in terms of infrastructure management and all of those types of things. And so they'll be prioritized, and a series of recommendations will come out of that plan. And then I think the goal long term is for this task force to also have some implementation responsibility. So going forward, trying to make sure that some group is assigned to really specifically focus on resiliency issues under the, sort of as a sort of subset of all of the planning issues that the town works on, so that resiliency doesn't get lost in the conversation. So, so it's an important role. There's a lot going on with it right now. There's obviously a lot of money that's going to be flowing into projects that address resiliency, and so it's timely. So we'll go from there. And if anybody has questions about it, certainly I'm here to answer.
I didn't see where they noted what they thought the lifespan of this task force would be.
They didn't. I think that it's definitely meant to, be in place through the life of the plan. And my understanding is at least through the beginning part of the implementation piece to come up with the capital projects by town. So out of the plan should come at least a 5-year horizon of capital plans and projects that should be considered. And then beyond that, I think the town council will probably have to take a look and say, okay, how is it going, and assess at some point what the future of it looks like.
Yeah, because if it's a task force, I wouldn't expect it to be permanent. I'm used to seeing some sort of lifespan expectancy for these things, but okay.
Excuse me, sir, point of order. Will we, I'm like you, like Mike,
Can't
will
talk
we
either.
be working with other towns, other members of this task force? Do we have a list of them, or are we on our own?
So there's sort of a multi-level. So the way that the grant management right now is shaping up to work, the planners for each of the towns and the executives or town managers, depending on what everybody has, are sort of forming an executive committee. And so there'll be at least one planner and then one other representative from the towns on this committee. And that will be the one that is most active in holding meetings with the consultants, in managing the RFP process and all that kind of stuff. What will happen is each pair on that executive committee for the grant management, for the plan development, will be coming back to their individual bodies at the towns. And so, for example, Saybrook, I believe their Planning and Zoning Commission is going to act as the resiliency group. Westbrook has recently formed one. I think Fenwick has perhaps some representatives that are from beach associations and other groups that may jump in and help as well, which is a little bit less organized and formal. So it's just each community is having a choice in terms of how they make sure that information flows back to a body of people who can say, yep, this is working for our town, or nope, we need to, sort of adjust things to make sure that we're getting out of this what we're hoping to. So it's sort of a two-part piece. Out there, the task force will form. That will be sort of the generator of ideas and sort of truthing of effectiveness of the plan. And then those representatives will go, and a lot of the working details of the plan, running through the first drafts and making sure that, it all makes sense. Sort of the meat and potatoes of the work will get done by that smaller group and then brought back to the task force to make sure that it works.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I would like to move on to the 5C, discussion of potential updates to the zone planning, Clinton zoning regulations. Abby's provided us with a summary of things that she and the staff have identified that they had questions about. And I hope everybody's had an opportunity to read through these. The general statement, part is obvious things that we should be fixing. So I don't think there's anything to really discuss there. Section 3 definitions, what they're proposing is to try to move all the definitions into this one section so that we aren't spread out all over the place, and we can just refer to this section for consistency use, or for consistency. This is something that we've tried to do in the past, and then somehow each time a new section gets put in, it has its own definitions put in with it. So we sort of have to continually do this. Does anybody see any problems with following and getting the definitions all together? I certainly think it's a good idea, but if anybody has.
Mr. Chairman, I've been taking a course every Thursday from the University of Yukon that Abby put out for everyone to. It's every Thursday is a Zoom meeting. It's supposed to be an hour and a half, but it usually runs about 2 hours. And during the course from the attorneys that deal with planning and zoning, it's all planning and zoning, not wetlands yet. But one of the things that came up was how we have members, and I've done it myself. I abstained. They said that during the study group that we're not allowed to abstain. We have to vote. So if someone doesn't like something, you can recuse yourself from the whole vote if you don't want to be involved with a particular project. But you can't, when it's time to vote, you have to vote yay or nay. You cannot abstain from voting. And I know personally that throughout the years, I abstained twice. And you can recuse yourself, but you're not allowed to abstain. You have to make a vote. You have to vote. And that was that's from UConn. You can look it up yourselves. The planning and zoning members are not allowed to, after a vote comes up, just, oh, I don't like it, so I'm abstaining. If that's their point, and it was their point from the beginning, they liked the project, then they recuse themselves from the whole project. But we're not allowed to abstain anymore. We're not. And a lot of our members do it, and we can't do that. And you guys can check it out yourselves. The classes are really, really intense. I mean, they cover every single objective in the planning and zoning.
Okay.
Like I
How's
said,
that how's that impact definitions here?
well, the definition is, it's the definition of it's potential updates to the regulations.
Okay,
That's why it has to do with our regulations. And if people think that they can abstain from a vote, they can't. So that's,
yeah, that would be more in our bylaws, but
well,
so we need to make sure that that's correct. And the one that's most significant there is, you know, under is basically as chair, abstention, you know, the chair or not voting of the chair. So we'll have to double check that.
yeah,
part.
you were in there, the chair, but you have an option to vote or not vote.
Right.
But
It's not really under definitions, but you're supposed to vote. You can't use an abstention as a replacement for a nay vote, but you can use an abstention if you don't feel you have enough information to vote.
Yeah,
That's the only
and-
time you're really supposed to abstain. Otherwise, it's supposed to be yay or nay. So you can't use an abstention to just wiggle out of voting is the purpose of that.
Okay.
And recusal is completely different. For one thing, you recuse at the beginning of an agenda item, which means that the chair has the option to seat an alternate if someone's available.
that's correct.
And but sometimes you know you're supposed to recuse if your cousin's husband brings an application in, which is why I've done it a couple times in the last couple of years.
And I recused on my neighbor. I had a neighbor vote, so I recused, you know, and my sons I recused. So yes.
Okay. So going back to the memo from Abby, does anybody have any issue with the definitions being combined in one section as we've tried to do before? I'm hoping there isn't any
I
objection.
am completely in support of simplifying our regulations. I have worked on some of them over the years, but you know, we really do need professional staff getting a good eye at this, and anything in the way of making them easier to use and easier to interpret is something that I am in complete support of.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
me too.
Okay. Under section 4, I'm going to just go through because Abby did a nice job of, and the staff did a nice job of getting this all together. But section 4, they found some concerns with the landscaping plan, because basically it's incomplete. It's written incomplete and needs to just be cleaned up. So I personally think that is appropriate. I'm going to just, you know, unless somebody had an objection to it, Martin.
Just a comment. I think, I don't know if it's part of landscaping, but I would like to see more bike racks around town to try to encourage bicycling. And it maybe for the town center district, the village district, it may make sense as part of the landscaping provisions to look at location of bike racks or something of that nature.
Okay, thank you. Okay. For lot line revisions, they require approval from the CEO prior to recording the changes on the records.
It hadn't mentioned the health component before. That's what we needed to add was the
Right.
CRAD approval. Yeah.
And so they wanted to add the CRAD approval to this. I think, you know, again, this was something that makes sense. All of these changes, even the little ones, are going to require public hearing, of course, but we can probably group them together. The one that I was concerned might be objectionable or cause, at least provide some debate here is section 14 vendors. My concern is we've tried as a commission to work this out recently. And so even though it isn't everything we wanted, it was sort of the best we could do at the time. And I don't know how people feel about opening this up again and trying to get it to be a little bit more consistent, or if we think we've done the best job we can with it.
It might be just the intent here is to sort of take a look at which ones are necessary and which ones might not be. And so of all of them, and Kathy has done a great job of filling me in on some of the recent history, and especially with the stationary vendor discussions and stuff. And my goal here is certainly not to like rip the Band-Aid off and make this, you know, relive something that was a little fresh. I think the thing that we're trying to do is make Kathy's review process a little bit easier here, where there are redundancies with other folks covering similar pieces. And so I think we could potentially, if the commission is interested, achieve that goal without having to have the discussion of, I think, the stationary vendors or the seasonal outdoor use. There should probably, if there's, you know, if anything doesn't change, those would be the ones to stay as they are. The transient vendor piece really has more to do with door-to-door folks, people peddling. And there are ordinances that already cover that. They're regulated through the police department and arguably better enforced through police, because when folks call, typically they're going to call the police if somebody's out wandering the neighborhood. They wouldn't associate somebody going door to door with a zoning or land use function. And I think that's something that is important. There is a provision in transient vendors for folks who are at a site for 3 hours or less, but the commission could wrap that into the stationary vendor definition of anybody who is, you know, vending or doing these activities from a property versus in a mobile fashion, going door to door, and sort of, you know, in the definition section, making it clear what that line is. But I think the biggest one that Kathy and I have been talking about, and it's brought up now only because the weather's getting warmer, folks are already starting to call in for their permits. But anytime that there is an event, every single vendor, whether they're selling hot dogs or arts and crafts out of the back of their car, everybody who is vending is technically supposed to, by the way the regulations are written, get a permit separately, individual vendors from Kathy. Mm-hmm. The event itself is also supposed to get a permit. And so in that case, if you've got a large event coming, you may have 5 vendors, 3 of which get permits, somebody else doesn't. The event is already happening. It's hard for Kathy to enforce because it's typically on evenings or weekends. And it's redundant. There's like multiple permits happening for the same thing. So Kathy's doing, you know, there could be, you know, 5 reviews for a single event of essentially the same thing. And so I think that's really the reason that was brought up, was, is there a way that we can not necessarily revisit all of the ups and downs in what was going on with vendors? And I think that, you know, again, stationary and seasonal make perfect sense. It's those other 2 categories, the transient and the event vendors, that seem to have some opportunity for some tweaking to make Kathy's reviews a little more streamlined.
If I may add on to what Abby just said, because she said it perfectly, but I'll just give you a couple of examples without naming names. We had a vendor recently who was doing door-to-door selling, I don't remember, windows or solar or one of those types of things. And there was an issue with an expired license or registration. That's really not under me. It's under the police, but it was kind of, now the way things are run, it's still under me. And Abby was saying, you know, geez, it's really not your function of zoning. That's really more of a police issue if there's a problem with that kind of stuff. And when she mentioned the events, there's been a couple of instances in town where, especially with COVID, where people didn't, you know, have a lot of extra money, businesses and specifically restaurants, they might have had an event where they had maybe 6 different restaurants represented, and maybe 2 of them came in for permits and 4 of them didn't. And I didn't know because the event was on a Saturday. And so the people were saying, well, how come I had to get a permit to sell my sausage and peppers where nobody else did? And Abby said, you're giving all these people permits? And I said, yes. And she said, why don't we just do an event, like say the church fair or, anything that's coming up where there's going to be a lot of activities and a lot of vendors. As she said, it makes sense to look at it as a whole event instead of each individual crafter or person selling jam or whatever. So that's where this stems from.
Well, I was part of the organization of the International Food Truck event, the week after 4th of July last year. And that certainly, that approach certainly would have simplified things for us.
Yeah, I've been thinking of a lot of the town hall events that bring in multiple vendors and craftspeople, and it is, I did not realize the rule.
And
did
some
it
of them
that
are
way.
some of them are nonprofit, so they don't have to pay the fee, but we still have to put them through the process. And I had a couple restaurants say to me, well, it's COVID, we're coming out of it. I don't have money to come and get a permit from you. Then I have to get a permit from the police department. Then I have to pay for the, they're saying it's just, it's kind of restrictive on their part, and they were frustrated with it. So it was just, again, it's terrific with Abby. Now I can sort of share these situations with her, and she comes up with some really great ideas as to how to move things forward in a better way.
Kathy, that bonfire coming up on the 25th, that is that I got to issue the permits for the burning, but
So usually whenever there's an event, the fire marshal usually has to go, especially if there's tents. The building official has to go, depending if it's like a church fair, for example, across the street from the town hall.
Let's be at the beach, right by the pavilion.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, is there food trucks for that? Do they need a permit for that from you?
They
The
would.
town? It's for the town.
Yeah, they would.
Did you-
Just like Alan was saying, they needed vendor permits for the event behind the town hall for the International Food Festival last July.
Right, of course. Yeah, I knew that one because of all the vendors, but the one that they're having at the beach, do they got to come and see you? For that
So
one?
this is the problem. I don't get a list of who's going, so I don't know who the vendors are. So I don't know whether or not they're applying for permits, or maybe they haven't. I don't really have a mechanism to catch that. And then if it happens on a Saturday and then it's gone, I have
This
no
one's
idea.
on a Sunday. I believe the 25th
Yeah.
is a Sunday.
So
of
it's kind of
March.
an interesting system because I don't have a way of quantifying, well, who's going to be there. No one ever gives me that list.
And
So-
one of the things that we've talked about, doing more of a coordinated approach between the departments of sort of a town-wide review, where it may start out as a zoning piece, but we pull in everybody who may have something to say about the event. So if we need, special coverage from emergency services, or we need the fire marshal to do extra duty, we can start to cover some of those kinds of things. And I think that's where the outdoor events piece, and I think it was section 28, was that where it was? That might be a place to look at those holistic pieces. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways in which the town approaches these things. And one of the things globally is, I think, important is to say, okay, how can we achieve the same level of review without putting folks through 17 different processes to get there?
Thank
And
you.
making sure we cover all the bases too, because, if we don't want to miss something. So if someone comes in to apply to me, I might say to them, make sure you contact the fire marshal or the building official for your tent, or if you're gonna have propane tanks to heat. And I don't have a way of circling back to guarantee that that's been done. I can call or email, but it would be nice to have kind of everybody involved just in case there's something that's missed.
Thank you. Any comments from the commission on this? No. It makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, so yeah, the vendor permits then for those two areas in particular, I think that makes a lot of sense to attack and try to simplify, make it so it's enforceable. That's actually kind of important. If the rules aren't enforceable, why have them?
And it's interesting, the way our language is worded right now, it says that for the vendor permits, they have to give us a copy the application to the police department, but it doesn't say a completed application. So if somebody applies to the police department for the permit, I don't need to make sure that it's signed before I sign off. So how do I know for sure that those people are circling back? So it's kind of a funny language. I had somebody call the other day and we were kind of checking up on it. And he said, well, you know, I want to know that I'm approved. And I looked at the language and it says a copy of the application, not approved, just the application. So I had to sign off on it.
Okay. A larger, in terms of number of things that would have to be fixed, is section 27 and 28. Or section 27, excuse me, schedule of uses by district. Basically, the proposal is to determine where it says in the schedule not applicable, that that should either be prohibited or it should be allowed one way or the other, not left as not applicable, because NA is sort of confusing.
I call it the dreaded NA because I don't know how to interpret that when I have somebody come in to ask about a use. I'm like, not the NA. It's confusing because it doesn't say yes, it doesn't say no. I'm not sure what it's for. And when John Guskowski was our consulting town planner, I talked with him about it too. And he said, where did those even come from? So I'm not sure where they're from.
Yeah, the difficulty here is I think there's enough of them that it's going to require a fair amount of time to root them all out and make a decision on, you know, the commission would have to make a decision on each one, or at least in groups of them, whether they belong as prohibited or if there's some, you know, potential use there or not. Okay, because I don't want to say we'll just blanket change all the not applicables to prohibited without actually looking at them individually. Now I might be too cautious, you know, but I think we actually have to go through them all and look at them, and make sure we're really doing that correctly. Any comments from the commission on that? You guys are quiet tonight.
I mean,
Okay.
do we have to get the, do we have to, you know, get recommendations for a group of these and then convene a meeting of the regulations committee? Is that what you're talking about, Mike?
Yeah.
So.
Let me add
Go ahead.
point. You know, the regulations committee very often ends up being a committee of the whole. Now that we have a planner on staff, it might be better to delegate that to staff and have them present the recommendations to
We
us.
absolutely can. Yeah. One of the things I had a question about was process and how you wanted to go forward with these. So that would be helpful to know. Yeah.
I would have no objection to that.
I think
So-
we definitely could too, because some of them are kind of obvious when they're allowed, the way the table's set up, that, you know, that if it's ZP, but then it says NA, you know, I think there's ways that we could definitely make recommendations based on the table and in the intent, and then come back to the commission with questions that they might want a special exception or a site plan.
Okay, thank you. I don't remember what the issue was with accessory uses, section 28. Let me look at that one again.
That was the commercial vehicles.
Oh, that's right. They're all, it's rather vague about what kind of vehicles, and it's difficult to enforce because there's so many differences now in types of trucks and vans.
And I've had two people come to me with letters from their boss telling me that it's required that they have their vehicle at home when they're on call. One is for the water company And the other was for another, I forget the name of the company now, but they also happen to have a truck that they drive, just a pickup. But it's, it could be a large one with, the 4 doors in the back, and maybe it hits that regulation of commercial. So they technically have 2, but they need the other one for emergencies. And I said to Abby, we talked at length about this, that maybe we could revisit, that regulation. And recently I had somebody with a Mack truck. And I said, well, you can't have a Mack truck, but he looked at the definition and it said, or similar or something, it was kind of vague language. And I know we talked about this a couple of years back. While I certainly am no expert on trucks and know how to tell how many pounds they weigh, I want to have a little discretion, but at the same time, I want it to be clear, because in instances too, where these people need these for our safety, I want to be able to them to be able to have their truck if there's an emergency at the water company, that they can get out to the public, or a bucket truck for the electric company or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, this is another one then where we would need you to give us some recommended language for it.
Comment?
Yep.
The Federal Highway Administration, one of the things they do is monitor travel on roads. You see the rubber hoses stretched across the roads where they count the number of vehicles. But to determine what kind of vehicles are making those trips, they have observers look at the traffic that goes by. And what they've done is come up with a classification system of 13 different types of vehicles. And it may be useful for you to take a look at that. I could drop it off at Town Hall. And look at what kind of vehicles you think would be appropriate in the residential areas off of this list. And the reason I'm raising this list, and they give examples of different classes of vehicles, is that it's standardized to national standards. So it reduces the chance of us being arbitrary in the type of vehicle that we're allowing or not allowing. You can look at a specific federally designated class of vehicle based on the characteristics. And it's meant for untrained or people who would just be observing vehicles going by quickly and making a check mark in that type of vehicle. So it doesn't require knowing about gross vehicle weight or any of that other stuff. And that might be a useful approach.
That would be great.
Yeah, so I think it might be something you may want to look at. Again, I think it would probably be best if you were to come back to us with a recommendation as to which classes might make most sense in the residential districts for commercial vehicles. Rather than us go through the list ourselves and argue about which ones should or should not be there.
Well, we can
Kathy.
still argue.
We can still argue.
Go ahead, Eddie.
Thank you, sir. Martin's right, but there's always an alternative of like I know for a fact some guys come home with the heavy trucks, like she calls it a Mack truck, but they're large, and it has inside there they got the welders and the compressors and stuff, and they are on call, because take for instance, like they're paving I-84, right? So and if they have a problem on I-84 Empire, just say, the guy that's on duty would go to this section and he's on duty, but it's a pretty big truck. It's a dual axle truck, but it's box truck. A lot of people can park at the commuter lots. I drove truck for 47 years. If you have a truck that you're coming home with, they'll allow you to park if you look at the back of a commuter lot, you'll see a lot of trucks there, and they're observed by the state police and stuff. But those are the guys that need the trucks to go to work that are too big to bring home. You know what I mean?
That's good to know. I didn't know
And,
that.
and they won't bother, they really will not bother you, you know, and the guy could put his name and number on the thing for, you know, to contact. And a lot of the state troopers go in there and watch the trucks, not to ticket them, but because they're loaded with tools and stuff. And you got people from the highway go. But the commuter lot is another alternative, the rear of the commuter lot.
Thank you, Eddie. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, Adam would tell you. I mean, he's in construction. You know, I mean, they're very good. They don't bother anybody. I mean, they don't want to, you know, have a trucking company take over the lot. I mean, but if you need to go home, you can park there, you know, and they won't bother you at all.
Okay.
And that stops the neighbors, you know, from complaining, because when you start a diesel, all the smoke comes out and it waffles through people's houses, and some people see the windows open. Next thing you know, the house is, you know, full of, you know what I
It's
mean?
noisy if it's, you know,
It's noisy,
Yeah.
it is, there's no quietness about it at all. So, but the commuter lot they're a good place to bring the big trucks, not like, I mean, some of our guys from the DPW bring their trucks home, but they go out because the storm's coming. You know, they already have their truck, but they're smaller trucks. But the other ones, the big ones,
Yeah.
um,
Just a question, just stream of consciousness. The former Unilever warehouse off 145 seems to have an awful lot of trucks parked out.
yes,
there.
yeah,
Is that-
right. But that's
who-
privately owned.
Okay, so is he running a parking lot there for heavy vehicles or what?
Oh, you mean down where the old post road is?
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's
he's talking.
Amtrak. Amtrak's doing work
Those
down
are
there.
Amtrak trucks then? Okay.
Yep. I went and talked to them.
But that's a privately owned.
I was just curious.
That's the one that went before us, you know, and we killed that, you know, about the dump, you know,
Yeah,
they're trying to BS us about the dump, but that guy rents out spaces. I know that for a fact, but that's privately owned. But the public owned, Martin, is the commuter lot, and they won't bother. They really won't. So that's just an alternative, you know. So if somebody gives you a hard time, just tell them to go up there.
Hmm.
You know what should be on a lot and what shouldn't be, you know.
I think that's easy. It's harder than you think. Because some of the descriptions of the trucks, like a tow truck could be huge flatbed, or it could be
Yeah.
small. You know, people's pickup trucks are getting larger for their own personal use.
Yeah, those
Um,
guys are on duty all day, like Robbie Aaron said, you know, that his flatbed truck is a pretty big truck, you
Yeah.
know, and it's diesel. And when that's started, there's a lot of smoke coming from that. So, but to drive, you know, the people are on duty all night, and when the state police call, you gotta go. You gotta be on the highway. But
Yeah.
it's, you just drive, pick it up and go. You know.
We'll put together some recommendations for how to make things specific enough for Kathy to enforce uniformly,
Right.
without sort of that ambiguity piece. And that, you know, Martin, certainly the list that you're talking about, we can chat about, because I think that'd be very helpful. We were
Yeah.
looking at the state classifications by gross weight and having to have folks bring the registrations in and that kind of stuff. But if there's a better way that is more geared toward lay activity.
Yeah,
I
it
think
won't
that's
be
great.
ambiguous anymore, just
Mhm.
so you can do a
Now-
good job.
The one that I thought was little, you know, the following one, the idea of differentiating between regular and pygmy animals.
there you go.
I would have said we should stay with the number of animals, not trying to differentiate whether they're regular
Yeah.
size or pygmy.
But the problem is there are certain animals that can't survive without a companion. So
Oh.
they have to become in a pair. They don't survive if they don't have their friend.
So they need a bigger lot.
Well, yeah, but we've had people that call with the small animals. I don't remember whether it's goats. We actually have a report from the Department of Agriculture about it. That they literally can't survive without a friend. And so they need to have two. They're treated as a unit. So it's instead of being like, for example, a donkey or a horse, it's a unit. And so.
What species are we talking about here?
I went through this, I remember with John Guskowski, because he actually helped write the regulation for the state. And Abby, is it goats?
I believe the correspondence that I've seen from you guys is pygmy goats specifically
Yeah.
is the.
They literally
Yeah.
can't survive without a friend.
How big is a pygmy goat?
They're little.
Well, I mean, how many pounds does a full-grown one weigh?
That I don't know.
I don't know pounds. I know they're smaller than my dog, which is just about 90 pounds. The correspondence, Kathy, that I think that you forwarded to me had something like 250 to 400 square feet of area is actually sufficient on most properties. So if you had 40,000 square feet, 400 square feet of that of your yard would need to be penned in for these little critters.
Yeah, we
Well,
have to help them.
The thing about goats is that they climb. If your neighbor's got goats, you got goats. I mean,
Yeah, but we
think
have
we need a
rules
little bit
about
more
pens.
information about this.
Yeah, we have rules about pens and setbacks too. So, I mean, they have to be properly contained, because I remember you guys had a whole discussion a couple of years ago about the definition of an enclosure. I think it was when Ken Slater, our attorney, was here. What is an enclosure? But you guys all know I'm very professional. I do my job, but I have a soft spot for animals. And I said to this woman, I can't let you not have your goat and have him be depressed. We have to get him a friend. So that's why I wanted to bring this to the attention of the commission. I can get more information, but it's not a lot of species, but it's a few that just need a friend.
Well,
Yeah,
it might
I
mean adjusting the language to be consistent with, what the state requirement or state,
Yeah, and again, it's only
s-
certain ones.
right?
Mhm.
Back to
Okay.
definitions.
And by having a friend, I mean, does that mean an opposite sex friend? Is that what we're talking? I mean,
I think
there's
it can be
there's
the
a huge
same
difference
sex.
between keeping nanny goats and billy goats in terms of the odor and the effect upon your neighbors.
I think it's the species that they're someone of the same, type.
That is so funny.
It's true.
I know. Nanny goat. Billy goat.
Well, I mean,
I'm
I'm
sorry.
not sure that the species needing a friend should be the deciding factor or not. I mean,
right, I mean,
pygmy goats need friends, but pygmy horses don't. Do you tell a person they can't have a second horse, but the guy
No.
next to him can have a second goat?
No, it's just it's considered a unit. You're not supposed to buy one.
I
They're
see.
supposed to come as a pair.
Gee, I
And
wish-
so if they're small enough, where the pygmy part comes in, then they could be, as Abby said, in a small section of the yard where it wouldn't be that they would need extra space. They would just need a small area penned in with the enclosure. But
And
instead of
if
having
there
one
was
for each
interest
area-
from if there were interest from the commission in exploring this farther, what we would do is go through, we do a comparison of the state regulations, Department of Ag, other towns and what they're doing, and we'll give you a whole summary of the issue and what the potential impacts are to the neighbors and then that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would not want to sign off on this without knowing a lot more about it. I mean, one of the biggest agricultural problems is what we euphemistically call bad fences. And let's just leave it at that.
Adam always makes sense when he says something. He does. He doesn't say a lot, but when he does. I
Okay.
would say, hey, you can have two goats. I can't have two horses. Two
I
pygmy
will
horses."
volunteer to do that research.
All right,
I will bring something back.
okay.
Okay, and
I'm sure.
then I'm
sure.
going to move us on to the next item. Parking. Basically, we do not currently address what the state regs say we need to. That summarizes that section. So we do need language here to deal with accessible parking requirements and making sure that that's appropriate and fits the state regs.
I thought we do that when people are applying for a permit. If you need so many parking spaces.
So you need
for
so many
business.
there's minimum and maximum parking space requirements in our regulations, but the parking section doesn't handle the most recently adopted legislation that deals with the electric vehicle charging stations. And any lot that has 30 spaces or more is supposed to have 10% of those spaces available for EV stations and have the infrastructure in place for those. And so that's what that legislation did. We would be obligated as staff to evaluate applications for large projects like that come in for new lots or redevelopments of a property to make sure that they comply. But it's easier to not miss it if it's in our regulations. It's, whenever there's something that happens at the state level that's sort of a mandate, it makes a lot more sense to make sure that it's in our code so that it's not something that,
Yeah,
we're trying to follow 17 different public acts that may have happened in the past. We want to adopt those changes so it's in one place for our folks applying in town.
Can I ask what happened to the town hall EV that was supposed to be back there?
I believe one of the
They
stations
pulled out.
works and one doesn't. Did they have it pulled out? I haven't actually looked at that. I feel like
That's what I've heard too, that only one works and one doesn't. And we have somebody who works in town hall who was telling us the other day, he has an electronic vehicle and he was telling us one's broken, but he also said it's difficult. Like if you're driving down 95, one of the rest stops, I believe it's the one on the north side, doesn't work. The one on the south does. And then there's also a thing about the fast charging. It's kind of like with your phone where you have a fast charger and then you have the regular one so that you can get going quicker. So there's a lot to it. But these aren't the ones with the advertisements like we saw the last time. These are just the chargers.
I believe these are just, level 2 standard chargers that typically take a little bit longer, but and again, they have to provide the infrastructure to support them and all that kind of stuff. I don't believe there's a maintenance provision in the Public Act, but that's not to say that the commission, if there was a, similar to ongoing site maintenance and compliance with your site plan requirements, that this would be, if it's in our regulations, could be enforceable under that element as well.
Would
And
people
then-
be forced to install if they like Mike's property? Would Mike be liable to or forced to install an EV charger for
Any new
public-
parking, any new parking area with 30 spaces or more for commercial or multifamily would have to have that, meet that 10%.
And
in commercial,
Because Tesla has good lobbyists and they got the federal regulations and state regulations to make the taxpayers put in the infrastructure so that their cars can get charged.
Wow.
Crazy.
Mike, save your pennies, Mike.
Okay, and then the last one is sort of a no-brainer, because our sign section has always been a hot mess. So they noticed that we need to review it so that it's neutral and that's a very important thing because people are always complaining that some people seem to be allowed to have a lot more signs than they are. And so, yeah, we do need to take care of that. I wholeheartedly support that.
Question, would that be under the design review board? A lot of the discretion, it wouldn't be our discretion.
The discretion on what the regulations contain are for the Planning and Zoning Commission, your zoning function, the legislative authority. The DRB is looking at the look and feel of the sign. They're looking at, does it meet sort of the aesthetic, sort of a vision for various sections around town, whether it's in a village district or just generally located. So a sign permit would have to go through them, but relative to whether or not the sign itself is even allowed in the first place and under what terms it's allowed, that happens through these regulations. And so what we're finding is some of the standards may not line up. The East Main Village District is missing, and then there's certain places where there certainly is references to content, and so they're a little bit unwieldy the way that they are. There may be a way to sort of streamline this. I think there are other conversations about design review and how we approach the design review board process that we will bring to the commission at a later time. And Michael, you and I can have a chat about that as well, about how that process is working. I've met with their chair as well to talk about it, but I think there's some opportunities for us in the office to do some more support there to make it a little simpler to get through that design review process. And we'll talk about that in another meeting, but the fundamentals of what signs can go where, in what sizes, what locations, that kind of stuff, is all through you.
Yeah, as Abby said, the East Main Street Village District was never put in there. So that's completely omitted. We want to add that back in, and, you know, it needs to be neutral content. We can't regulate per First Amendment what a sign says.
Thank you. Going back to my agenda now. I think
One
we have,
thing-
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask if there's a priority to these. So there's a lot in this memo, and what we're doing here, what we're trying to do here is flag for you what some of the more constant issues that come up in the office in the day-to-day administration of the regulations, where those are becoming sort of more noticeable. But you know, I think it's unrealistic to bring you comprehensive full evaluations of each sections of these at the next meeting. I think that's a lot. It's a lot to do, and it's also a lot for you to review and be hit with at once. And so one of the things that I was curious about is if there's any particular interest for sections to come first, or things that you feel like you know, we should be tackling right off the bat, and then come up with a strategy and a sort of recurring setup for the regulations committee to meet, or kind of what you want to do next.
Well, I can give you my opinion is that the things that are more correcting, you know, typo type, you know, or like the definition section, getting that together, getting summaries of errors and, you know, incorrect section names. All of those, I think, can be done quickly and without requiring a lot of, so I would say get those done while you're doing the research on the others.
I would
And-
add to that the places where you're asking for, you know, 25 paper copies of something, that it
Right.
probably would be a high priority to get those out of there, because that's just an imposition on our applicants.
I agree.
And I would say a priority should also be the parking requirements to bring it up to state standards.
Right.
Is that also the accessibility element that's in there in addition to the electric vehicle
Sure,
charging stations? or
whatever we have
just-
to do under state law.
Just a clarification, Abby, does the state standards, do they require the installation of the electric charging, or is it just setting aside some spaces that it could be installed?
I believe the infrastructure to support it has to be built.
Okay, so that you're talking about a lot of expense there, that's for sure. Okay.
After that, I can't just off the top of my head give you a priority beyond that.
Mhm.
I wouldn't want to just, I'm not comfortable doing that. I would like to either have the regulations committee do that, or us at our next meeting be prepared to discuss some prioritization of it.
Yeah.
If people don't mind, I would like it to be at our next meeting. We could, you know, have some ideas of what we think the other priorities should be after those levels.
Yeah, I think having heard what Abby's talking about, that we would be prepared to come in, you know, with after, you know, the typos and stuff that we just talked about, what we should attack first, second, third. I think that's a good approach.
Okay. And I'll talk with Abby, and I'll actually also come in prepared to give you my assessment of what might be a starting point for the discussion. So we aren't just all over the place. Okay.
Mhm.
So I'll try to have an order that we can use as our basis for discussion. Doesn't have to, it wouldn't be the final order, but it would be a starting point. Okay. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Okay. With that, we are now at item 6, is adjournment. Anybody have a motion here?
I will move to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Second from Mike. Okay. All in favor, please say
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstaining? Motion carries. We're adjourned at 8:09. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
folks.
Have a good
Bye.